Hitler has Jewish ancestry, and the Nazis are socialists. Well, both of these are myths, but that's just two myths about the Nazis in World War II that won't die, and they're far from the only ones. Did Hitler really get democratically elected, and were the Nazis actually close to developing an atomic bomb? Well, today, I'll be answering these questions and many more once and for all. Because my goal by the end of this video is not just for you to know what's false, but more importantly, to understand why these myths persist and what they hide about the real history. To kick things off, I'm looking at one of the most persistent rumors about Hitler himself, the claim that Hitler had Jewish ancestry. It sounds ironic given his anti-Semitism, but what's the truth behind it? This rumor suggests Hitler's paternal grandfather was Jewish, originating in the 1920s and 1930s among his political opponents in Austria and Germany. The goal was to undermine his authority as leader of an anti-Semitic party. It gained traction through unsubstantiated claims, including alleged testimony from Hitler's lawyer, Hans Frank, during the Nuremberg trials, who speculated without any evidence. Post-war conspiracy theories amplified it, often linking to ironic narratives about Hitler's supposed self-hatred. But here's the thing. Historical investigations, including genealogical studies by historians like Ian Kershaw, have found no credible documentation supporting Jewish ancestry. Hitler's family records trace his lineage to rural Austria, with no Jewish connections identified. The myth persists in fringe literature and online forums, but it completely ignores Hitler's obsessive emphasis on Aryan purity, which he enforced through laws requiring ancestry proofs for party members. So why does this myth matter? In reality, this falsehood distracts from the broader societal anti-Semitism in interwar Europe that fueled the Nazi rise. Economic crises and the stab-in-the-back legend blaming Jews for Germany's World War I defeat were far more influential than any personal history. By focusing on Hitler's supposed Jewish roots, people miss the point that anti-Semitism was widespread, systemic, and didn't need any personal motivation to become genocidal. Now here's one that surprises most people. Hitler was democratically elected as leader. Sounds reasonable, right? The Nazis won elections, so Hitler must have been voted in. But that's not how it actually happened. This misconception suggests Hitler won power through a direct popular vote, portraying the Nazi ascent as a democratic mandate. This stems from the Nazi Party's strong showings in the 1932 elections, where they secured 37% of the vote in July, becoming the largest party in the Reichstag. Propaganda films and post-war simplifications reinforced this image of electoral triumph. In reality, under the Weimar Constitution, the Chancellor was appointed by the President, not directly elected. President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler as Chancellor in January 1933 amid political instability, influenced by conservative elites hoping to control him. The Nazis never achieved an absolute majority in free elections. Their power consolidation followed through the Reichstag Fire Decree, an enabling act which suspended civil liberties and enabled dictatorship. This myth overlooks the erosion of democracy through violence, intimidation, and the suppression of opposition parties. Hitler's brown shirts terrorized political opponents in the streets. Once in power, the Nazis systematically dismantled democratic institutions. This shows how fragile republics can fall to authoritarianism during times of crisis, and why we can't just say the people voted for it when discussing the Nazi rise to power. Let's talk about another personal myth that won't go away: rumors of Hitler's homosexuality. These rumors emerged in the 1930s, fueled by his close ties to Ernst Röhm, the openly gay SA leader, and spread by political rivals like the Social Democrats. Post-war books and films sensationalized it, often conflating it with the regime's persecution of homosexuals under paragraph 175. But there's no evidence supporting this. Hitler's documented relationships were heterosexual, including with Geli Raubal, his niece, and Eva Braun, whom he married shortly before his death. The myth likely served as defamation, completely ignoring the Nazis' brutal crackdown on homosexuality, which sent thousands to concentration camps. In broader context, it reflects how personal smears were weaponized in interwar German politics, diverting attention from Hitler's calculated use of homophobia to consolidate power. This was most visible in the 1934 Night of the Long Knives purge of Rome and the SA, where Hitler used accusations of homosexuality and supposed plots against him to justify murdering his former allies. The real story isn't about Hitler's sexuality. It's about how the Nazis weaponized hatred against LGBTQ people as part of their broader campaign of persecution. Another myth tries to explain Hitler's hatred with a simple story: the idea that Hitler's anti-Semitism stemmed from personal rejections, like his failure at art school or a supposed Jewish ex-girlfriend. Popular narratives attribute Hitler's hatred of Jews to failures like his rejection from Vienna's Academy of Fine Arts or an alleged Jewish ex-girlfriend. These stories, popularized in films and biographies, suggest a psychological origin tied to personal grudges. The evidence shows Hitler's anti-Semitism crystallized post-World War I, influenced by the stab-in-the-back myth, blaming Jews and communists for Germany's defeat. By 1919, he was openly anti-Semitic in speeches, using it to rally support during economic turmoil. The art school rejection happened in 1907 to 1908, years before this, and no verified romantic link exists. This myth humanizes Hitler in a way that's completely misleading. It suggests that if only he'd gotten into art school, or if only some relationship had worked out, the Holocaust might never have happened. That's dangerous thinking. It ignores the pervasive anti-Semitism in European society and the Nazis' systematic ideology, which evolved into the Nuremberg Laws in 1935 and ultimately the Holocaust. Millions of Europeans shared these anti-Semitic views. Hitler's personal experiences didn't create the Holocaust. A continent-wide hatred did. Let's be honest, so far these myths have been making Hitler seem less monstrous than he was. But before I continue, it's more monstrous that you've watched this far into the video without subscribing. Do it, okay, but now I need to tell you about conspiracy theories that emerged after the war. One of the biggest is that Hitler survived the war and escaped to Argentina, Antarctica, or even the moon. Conspiracy theories claim Hitler fled to Argentina, Antarctica, or elsewhere, surviving his reported suicide. These arose from Soviet secrecy about his remains and sightings, reported in declassified FBI files, fueled by books like Grey Wolf from 2011. Eyewitnesses in the Führer bunker confirmed Hitler and Eva Braun's suicides on April 30th, 1945, with bodies cremated. Soviet autopsies, dental records, and DNA tests from 2009 verify his death. The myth ignores the chaos of Berlin's fall and the regime's collapse. Berlin was surrounded by Soviet forces. There was no escape route. The bunker was underground, under siege, with the Red Army literally blocks away. Yet this myth persists in neo-Nazi circles and media like The Boys from Brazil. It underestimates Allied intelligence and the impracticality of escape amid total encirclement. More importantly, it feeds into the idea that somehow the Nazis got away with it, that justice wasn't served. That's what makes this myth particularly dangerous. Here's one that's just ridiculous, but won't die. The claim that Hitler had only one testicle. This monarchism claim originated in World War I, British propaganda songs, and unverified Soviet autopsy reports, mocked in Allied morale-boosting efforts. You might have heard the song "Hitler Has Only Got One Ball," sung to the tune of the Colonel Bogey March.
Hitler has only got one ball, Goering has two but very small. Hitler has something similar.
Medical examinations during his lifetime and post-war analyses dismiss it. A 1923 prison doctor's report noted no such condition. The myth, while trivial, shows how bodily ridicule was used to dehumanize enemies. But here's the problem with that. It distracts from serious discussions of Hitler's actual health issues, like the Parkinson's symptoms he exhibited in his final years, or his dependence on drugs administered by his personal physician. Another myth romanticizes the Nazis in a weird way. The idea that Nazis were obsessed with the occult and practiced black magic. Stories of Nazi expeditions to Tibet or Antarctic bases for mystical artifacts stem from Heinrich Himmler's interest in esotericism and the Ahnenerbe organization. Hollywood loved this stuff. Think Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Nazis are hunting for the Holy Grail. Hitler mocked occultism, viewing it as nonsense. Symbolism like the swastika was co-opted for nationalist propaganda, not because of any mystical power. Figures like Himmler engaged in pseudoscience, but the regime's actions were driven by racial ideology and geopolitics, not magic. This myth, popularized in media like Indiana Jones, actually romanticizes evil in a way. It makes the Nazis seem like they were chasing supernatural powers, when in reality they were implementing a coldly rational, industrialized system of genocide. The Holocaust wasn't mystical, it was bureaucratic. That's what makes it so terrifying. Normal people with normal jobs implemented mass murder through paperwork and logistics. Some people think Hitler was just insane or mentally ill, which would explain everything. Portrayals of Hitler as mad simplify his fanaticism, often citing late war paranoia from drug use or bunker isolation. If he was just crazy, then normal people couldn't do what he did, right? Wrong. Historians like Volker Ulrich describe him as ideologically driven and strategically astute, not clinically insane. Traits like narcissism were functional for his leadership. This myth reduces accountability, ignoring how sane individuals enabled atrocities amid economic despair and nationalism. The truth is more disturbing. Hitler was rational enough to build a political movement, strategic enough to outmaneuver his opponents, and calculating enough to implement genocide on an industrial scale. Calling him insane lets everyone else off the hook. It suggests that only a madman could do these things, when history shows us that ordinary people functioning within normal societal structures committed these crimes. Here's one about Nazi technology. Were the Nazis close to developing an atomic bomb? Wartime fears suggested German physicists like Werner Heisenberg were near fission, prompting the Manhattan Project. This myth has persisted, suggesting the Nazis were on the verge of superweapons that could have changed the war. Germany's program stalled due to miscalculations, resource diversion to rockets, and immigration of Jewish scientists. By 1945, they hadn't achieved criticality, unlike the US. The Nazis had expelled or murdered many of their best scientists simply because they were Jewish. This wasn't just morally wrong, it was strategically idiotic. This myth overstates Nazi innovation, ignoring Allied superiority in industrial capacity. The reality is that Nazi Germany's racial ideology actively undermined their technological capabilities. They lost some of their greatest scientific minds to their own hatred. Let's talk about the German military. The myth of the clean Wehrmacht claims the regular army was uninvolved in atrocities. Post-war memoirs by generals like Franz Halder claim the army was apolitical, blaming crimes on the SS. This was incredibly convenient for them after the war, especially as West Germany was being rearmed during the Cold War. Archival evidence shows Wehrmacht participation in massacres like Babi Yar, rapes, and the Commissar Order executing Soviet officials. Over 80% of Eastern Front divisions reported such killings. The regular German army wasn't just standing by while the SS committed atrocities. They were active participants in war crimes and genocide. Originating in Cold War rearmament needs, this myth was thoroughly debunked by 1990s exhibitions revealing complicity, but it persisted for decades because it was politically useful. West Germany needed an army, and you can't build an army if you're telling everyone that the previous army was full of war criminals. Another big one that gets thrown around constantly. The Nazis were socialists because it's in their name, right? National Socialist. The National Socialist name suggests leftist leanings, used today to equate fascism with socialism. You'll see this argument all over social media and political debates. Hitler purged socialist elements like the Strassers in 1934, banned unions, and allied with industrialists. Policies favored private enterprise under state control, embodying fascism. The Nazis privatized state industries, worked closely with major corporations like IG Farben and Krupp, and violently suppressed actual socialist and communist movements. This myth ignores the regime's anti-communist violence and capitalist collaborations. The first people the Nazis sent to concentration camps were communists and socialists. The Nazi economic system was fundamentally capitalist, just with heavy state direction toward military goals. Using socialist in their name was a propaganda move to attract working-class voters in the 1920s, nothing more. And finally, the idea that all Germans were Nazis or fully supported the regime. This stereotype assumes universal enthusiasm, often from Allied propaganda depicting monolithic support. It's an easy narrative. Germany went bad. All Germans supported it. End of story. Party membership peaked at 8.5 million, which is 10% of the population, in 1945, with many joining for career reasons post-1933. Support varied. Coercion via Gestapo, surveillance, and economic incentives played major roles. Resistance groups like the White Rose existed, showing diversity. This myth erases victims like political dissidents, religious objectors, and forced laborers. It also makes it harder to understand how authoritarian regimes actually work. Most people in Nazi Germany weren't enthusiastic supporters. They were people navigating a system where opposition could get you killed, where conformity brought economic benefits, and where propaganda shaped what information they received. These myths persist due to a mix of wartime propaganda, post-war narratives, and modern misinformation. Some serve political agendas today. The Nazis were socialists. Myth gets used to attack the left. The clean Wehrmacht myth helped Cold War rearmament. The Hitler had Jewish ancestry myth creates a false irony that distracts from systemic anti-Semitism. Historical scholarship increasingly debunks them with archival evidence. As more documents get declassified and more research gets published, we understand the complexity better. But myths spread faster than corrections. It's critical to approach these topics with nuance, recognizing the complexity of individual motivations and societal pressures under the regime. Understanding the truth helps us learn from history rather than distort it. These myths don't just get facts wrong, they obscure the real lesson. They make fascism seem like something that couldn't happen again, when in reality, the conditions that enabled it, mass economic despair, scapegoating of minorities, erosion of democratic norms, are things we need to watch for in any society. If you enjoyed this video and want to see truly evil WW2 experiments that actually happened, click the video on screen now.